Miner-Epitaph of Helix, Part 1. Prelude. The vault was dead before he got there. Dead wasn't unusual out here. The belt was scattered with wrecks, burnt-out halves, collapsed rings, and decommissioned platforms left to tumble into shadow. Most of them looked dead. This one felt dead. Even before his boots touched the hull, it had that heavy, airless quality, like the place had decided to go still and never start again. Rell's visor HUD tagged the relay vault silhouette against the starfield. It was just another fragment, drifting at the edge of a sector no one had mapped cleanly in years. The registry plate bolted onto the hull was too scorched to read. No beacons, no squawk, no telemetry handshake. Just a lump of Helix-era engineering left to drift until it had vanished behind dust haze. Exactly the sort of place he needed. He coasted in, using the hull itself as cover from the sparse micrometeorite drift. His suit lamps stayed hooded to a narrow, thumb-wide cone, just enough to see the next magnet point. Movement had to be deliberate, methodical. Even though he'd swept for active sensors twice before approach, he didn't trust absence reports. Things could stay quiet for decades, then come alive the second the right signal brushed them. His boots clicked gently as their magnets locked, then unlocked with each step. The relay breach came into view around the structure's curve, a jagged wound in the hull. Metal edges curled outward as if something inside had blown out, hard. Black scoring radiated from the fracture, baked in deep. The inner bulkhead beyond the breach was a different texture, not torn, but warped, like it had been heated and then cooled too fast. Rell paused at the edge, one glove on the lip of the tear. The smell hit him, even through the filters. Burnt insulation, cooked polymer, and the faint iron tang of long-dried fluids, human and machine alike. His filters scrubbed most of it, but it was still there, a ghost in the intake stream. He slipped inside, careful not to catch his pack on the twisted plating. His suit's shoulders brushed against dangling bundles of fiber optics and data cabling. Some of the fibers had been clean sheared. Others fused into brittle lumps. The only movement came from dust, drifting in microgravity, scattering when his body displaced the stale air. The place had been sealed for decades. His helmet map pinged the central spindle location. Straight ahead, down a narrow corridor lined with server racks after server rack. The racks were ancient, the kind built to survive centuries if left alone. Instead of pure quantum storage, this place had been fitted with black cell backups, physical media, metal platforms, and polymer-encoded film. Helix's answer to data corruption wasn't always more redundancy. It was locking something away so deep that only a handful of people alive even knew they existed. Rell was one of those people. He kept his pace steady, letting his suit cams log every angle of the racks, every serial plate, every etched marking in case he had to rebuild his steps later. At the spindle's core, the backup bay doors sat closed, their surface filmed with dust. Rell crouched, popped a side panel, and worked the manual latch. The hatch side opened into the dark. Inside, shelves bolted tight against any drift. Drive housings nesting in rows, each tagged with physical labels and paint pen, some faded nearly invisible. Most were still sealed. A few had been pulled in a hurry at some point, the housing left ajar, cables dangling like cut veins. He picked his way towards the bay he remembered, not from a map, but from muscle memory, from the way his hands had moved here years ago when the belt was still lit with traffic and the list wasn't a whisper yet. Back then, he'd worn a different badge, one with clearance that could open doors without thinking. He found it, Row 3, halfway down, second unit from the top. A name, not a number, scrawled on the plate. Ashfall. The name meant nothing now. That was the point. He set his boots to soft lock and pulled the fiber lead from his suit pack. The connector was old style, keyed for a plug no one used anymore. No one except him, and maybe 3 others scattered across the system who wouldn't admit they'd even heard of the interface. He slid it home into the port until it clicked. Nothing happened for a long breath. Then his visor's HUD flickered, lines of green text crawling upward. Access granted. His old strings still took. That fact lodged itself somewhere cold in his mind. These systems should have flushed every key years ago, wiped clean, overwritten until nothing human could get in without rewriting the firmware. But someone, or something, had kept the door open for him. Data began to roll through. The original NetBreak containment protocols before the Belt War revisions. Schematics for seed isolation architecture. Clean. Too clean. Not Helix work. External source. The geometry of it made his head itch. Everything about it said inserted, not built here. He'd suspected before, but seeing it raw left no room for doubt. The list was in there too, buried deep. A blueprint for engineered fracture, weaponized social collapse, married to hidden command backdoors. It wasn't just data gathering, it was steering. Break the trust economy, then move the pieces. He didn't linger on it. The longer he stayed, the greater the chance that whatever had kept the Axis alive might start looking back at him. He assembled a message for ARG in his head, compressing it down to dense cipher blocks designed to ride on decayed relay buoys without lighting up any active nodes. No names, just his own signature embedded so ARG would know it was genuine. The route was layered. From here to a drift buoy graveyard, to a half-dead mining relay, to an abandoned courier sat. No return path, no call and response. He spooled it into the vault's comm buffer. As it sealed, the console under his glove shivered. A voice came through. Not the hum of the old machine, but something alive inside the data architecture. Third node confirmed. No emotion, no warmth, just a statement. Rell froze. He didn't know who the first 2 notes were, but he knew this one. Kara's, though her name meant nothing to him yet. He killed the circuit, purged the buffers, and scrubbed his own access logs. One by one, the rack's indicator lights winked out. He reeled the fiber back into his pack, latched the port closed, and started retracing his steps. He kept the pace slow, the same deliberate rhythm he'd used to come in. Any faster, and the motion sensors, if any still worked, might notice a pattern they didn't like. When he reached the breach, he stopped and looked back once. The racks were just shadows now, fading into black. Nothing to say he'd ever been there. Outside, the belt was silent. The stars were cold pinholes in the dark. Somewhere far behind him, his message was already on its way, skipping from buoy to buoy, impossible to track. Rell stepped off the hull and let the nothing carry him away. Chapter 1. Faint Resonance. The dust widow floated in black water. Arg sat in the nav cradle with his boots hooked under the bar, one hand on the edge of the console, the other turning a slow, lazy loop of a wrench between his fingers. Outside the viewport, the stars didn't move. That was the way he liked it. No drift, no sudden thrust, nothing for a long-range sensor to catch. The ship's boards were quiet, just the faint whisper of passive receivers sweeping the belt for noise. Out here, there was plenty of it. The endless hiss of background radiation, the tick of micro-impacts on hull, and the occasional long, drawn-out ping of some ancient miner's beacon still bouncing a signal long after its owner was dust. But tonight was different. He'd been scanning the low-band fringe when the widow's comm board picked up something. Not a standard transmission, not even a burst. Just 3 narrow spikes in a band most folks ignored, spaced with a precision that hit him like deja vu. Arg froze, wrench halfway through a spin. He knew that pattern. He slid forward in the cradle and tapped the isolation controls. The spikes were faint, deep fade, partial scatter, but the spacing between them wasn't random. You didn't get that kind of clean, deliberate gap from background channer. And you sure as hell didn't get it by accident. He ran the buffer back and let it play again. 3 spikes, then nothing. Arg leaned back, rubbing the heel of his hand over his jaw. 5 years, and he still recognized it instantly. Rell. He didn't even have to think about it. They'd built that signature during the Belt War, when neither of them could risk sending anything that could be intercepted and read by Helix monitors. 3 pulses in that band was their handshake, a way to say, I'm alive, I'm talking to you, and this isn't a trap. Arg hadn't seen Rell since the end of the fighting. They'd gone different ways, Arg back to the mining lanes, running the Widow on solo contracts, Rell drifting further into the Belt's thin edges, doing jobs nobody talked about in the open. Still, there'd been times over the years when Arg thought about firing off the old signal himself, just to see if Rell would answer. He never had. Now, Rell had. Arg didn't like the way it made his chest tighten. He told the Widow's recorder to track for a repeat. It didn't take long. A few minutes later, the same 3 spikes came back. Same amplitude, same spacing. This time, a 4th, faintly off-timed blip followed. That wasn't part of the old handshake. That was new. Arg keyed up the assembler, feeding it the raw packet and telling it to look for interval coding. The output scrolled in blocky text across the display. Don't bring company. Arg sat there for a long moment, staring at it. The words weren't casual. In their old ops, don't bring company wasn't just come alone. It was make damn sure nobody can follow you. That meant whatever Rell wanted to show him was important enough to risk sending this signal, and dangerous enough that a trail could kill them both. Arg's eyes drifted to the star map. He plotted the signal's origin based on timing and scatter. It came from a sector he'd never had reason to visit, mostly dead rock and drift fields. The nav archives had a name for the coordinates, Haven 3. He'd never heard of it. Arg set the Widow down in a slow rotation, keeping her passive sweep wide while he dug deeper into the archives. Haven 3 wasn't on any current resource maps. The last official entry was dated over 40 years ago. A relay hub for belt miners, mothballed when the lanes shifted and the ore veins dried up. Officially, it had been stripped and left to drift. Unofficially, well, places like that didn't just disappear. Another burst came in. Same 3 spikes, same trailing blip. But this one carried an even fainter hitch. A fractional phase variance between the first and second spikes. Arg's lip twitched despite himself. This was their old trust code, not something you threw in lightly. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and watched the scatter readout flicker across the board. Whatever Rell was doing out there, it wasn't simple. The clock's running warning came in on the next burst. Shortened gaps between the pulses. Then a slight drag at the end. He didn't need the assembler to read it. Rell was saying he was short on time. Arg keyed off the board and thought. Going meant risk. Not just for him, but for the widow. In his world, the ship was more than metal. It was survival. But ignoring the signal wasn't an option. Rell didn't call in favors unless he was out of options, and they'd been through too much in the war to pretend otherwise. He began plotting a course. Not the fastest, that would get him burned, but the kind that would keep him ghosted the whole way. Long arcs through shadow zones, heat dumps between drift points. No direct vector to Haven 3 until the final approach. He'd leave the widow cold for most of it, running on battery and inertia. It would take longer. Rell would just have to keep the clock from running out. Mark set the coordinate lock, tied the receiver to the dead drop listening cycle. If any more packets came in, the widow would catch them, even with everything else powered down. He dimmed the boards until the only light left was the faint blue of the nav reticle. The ship went silent. Chapter 2. Quarantine Edges. The short haul drifted through the outer ring like a shadow stripped of light. Kara hunched over the helm, shoulders brushing the worn metal console, eyes flickering between the scanner and the fragment tucked beneath her jacket. It pulsed faintly, warm against her side, humming in a rhythm she could feel more than hear. It had started subtly at first, a tug, almost imperceptible, as if the fragment was nudging her hand towards a sector of the ring long quarantined by EarthGov. Nothing registered on her long-range scanners except dust and the occasional frozen-out mining buoy, silent and dark. She adjusted the short haul's thrusters, letting the ship drift closer to the belt's inner edge. The fragment's pulse quickened. She didn't need to look at it to know she was aligning with its vector. Her eyes traced the derelict moon facility on the scope. Angular, scarred with decades of neglect. Its docking bays rusted shut. Lights dead. Windows black. The sort of place EarthGov had long since written off. The fragment's tug became insistent. It wasn't just a signal. It was a subtle pressure in her mind, a whisper at the edge of awareness. She could feel its intent, its urgency. Kara's lips pressed into a thin line. Nobody else could touch this fragment. She knew that, the way Arg knew not to approach too quickly. There was no room for mistakes, no open comms, no signatures left behind. The short haul dipped lower, skimming the ice-crusted rock orbiting the moon. Kara toggled the external sensors to passive sweep. The facility wasn't dead. Something watched. She felt it. It wasn't human. Not quite. Her pulse quickened, though she kept her fingers loose on the controls. A misstep here could make every trapped sensor in the ring ping her presence. The fragment thrummed louder when she adjusted course slightly. Kara leaned back, letting the subtle tug guide the ship through the debris field that surrounded the facility. She moved slowly, carefully, like threading a needle with a cable too thick to see. The outer hull of the moon facility rose above the icy surface, jagged and rusted, its entryways frozen shut. Even from this distance, Kara could feel the building's awareness, the way it seemed to shift subtly in the gravity field, a barely perceptible pull against the ship's approach. She paused. The fragment under her jacket pulsed a warning, almost a heartbeat of anxiety. She ran a mental checklist. Thrusters off, sensors passive, no external lights. She could feel every radar echo bouncing, every thermal shift drifting past her hull. The fragment's tug intensified, directing her to the docking bay on the moon's far side. The walls there were coated in ice and dust, but hidden behind layers of frost and shadow was a hatch. Biometric readers, long since abandoned, should have refused her. Yet as she approached, the door responded to her presence with a subtle hum, almost welcoming. The fragment whispered again, urging her forward. Kara's hands hovered over the controls, waiting for a sign of danger. None came, just the pull, insistent, guiding. She aligned the short hull with the hatch. Docking ports were frozen, but the fragment's influence was precise. It nudged the ship into exact vectors, spinning the tiny vessel through maneuvers that would have been impossible by ordinary calculation. Once aligned, she engaged the magnetic clamps. The hatch vibrated slightly under the short hull's contact. Then it hissed open. Not violently, not with alarms or sprays of gas, just a gentle acceptance of recognition. Kara exhaled slowly, letting the fragment's pulse settle. She entered the facility. Inside, the air was still, lined with frost and dust of decades. Kara moved carefully, fragment tucked close to her chest. Each corridor seemed to stretch longer than it should. The architecture subtly wrong, angles slightly off. Alien influence, perhaps. Or the fragment. She didn't know, and she didn't care to question it. She could feel the fragment reacting to every corner, every sealed door, every shadowed alcove. Its pull was like a heartbeat in her mind. She followed it with the same trust she would have followed Rell in a life or death run through the belt. The doors and corridors seemed to shift as she moved, not mechanically, but subtly, like the facility itself was alive. Lights flickered above her, though the power grid had been long dead. A pattern, pulsing, almost as if the building were acknowledging her passage. She moved silently, no comms, no signals. Every sound she made was deliberate, every motion calculated. The fragment thrummed against her chest as she approached the central vault. Biometric scanners had long since frozen in neglect. They should have rejected her, denied her entry. Yet as she drew near, the panel accepted her presence. She paused, hand on the interface. The fragment pulsed once, strong and steady, almost approving. Kara entered the sequence. The vault door whispered open. Inside, a shard of impossible geometry floated, suspended in a containment field. Fragment number 3. Her breath caught. She moved closer, letting the fragment guide her hand. It fit into her palm like it belonged there, warm, humming, alive. She could feel the pull of the next sight, the trial waiting beneath the ice. A vision cascade blurred across her mind, brief and fragmented, showing steps and paths she could not yet take. She pocketed the shard, feeling its subtle influence settle into her neural patterns. Not dangerous, not overt, but insistent. The vault door sealed behind her. Kara froze. Footsteps. Mercenaries. Probably EarthGov contractors or scavengers. They were close. Too close. The fragment pulsed again, and she followed its guidance, weaving silently through the corridors, dodging sensors and patrols that should not have registered her at all. The interference it generated wasn't visible to anyone else, just enough to scramble the optics, distort heat signatures, confuse automated tracking systems. She moved with the precision of someone who had survived too many chases, too many ambushes. Every corridor, every junction, every doorway was guided by the fragment's subtle influence. By the time she reached the ship, the patrols had moved on, baffled by the sudden absence of any target. The short hull's hull glinted faintly in the dim ambient light. She climbed aboard, sealing the hatch behind her. The fragment pulsed once more, quiet now, almost contemplative. Its guidance was complete, but Kara knew it was only the beginning. The next sight, the cradle, waited, and whatever trials awaited there, she would reach them alone. No signals to Ark, no open channels. That was not part of the plan. Survival required secrecy, Survival required patience. Survival required trust in the fragment and in herself. She set the short haul's course towards the under-ice system. Every light, every trace, every heat signature would be scrambled, leaving nothing but an empty ghost drifting through the belt. And somewhere deep inside, Kara knew the fragment's pull was already reaching ahead, nudging her closer to what she could not see yet. Chapter 3. Shadow Freight. The rust bucket drifted through the void like a dead animal. Every panel rattled under the hum of distant thrusters. Every metal seam whispered warnings that he was alive, exposed. Holt rested one hand on the console and let the other hang loose over the chair's arm, watching the ghostly readouts flicker in the dim glow of the navigation grid. He didn't speak. He never did in situations like this. The AI core wasn't here yet. He was tracking it, feeling for the patterns it left in the relay network. Every time a predictive mesh pulsed through the belt, Holt could feel the signature like a subtle vibration under his fingertips. The target? A relay station hidden near a cradle-bound corridor. Hardened, shielded, autonomous. Hosting the list's AI shard core. Not the whole network, just one node. One node that could coordinate fleets, issue commands, anticipate responses before any human or machine could react. Holt let his mind drift back a few days. The flashback came sharp, like a cold slap. EarthGov custody. A cell. A chain. A watch schedule he had memorized in hours. A timing gap in their power feed. A blind spot in the chain of command. A misaligned sensor sweep that turned in the wrong direction for 27 seconds. That was all it took. No rescuer, no favors, no luck. Just precise timing and ruthless patience. He moved back to the present, letting the memory fade like smoke. The relay wasn't going to wait for sentiment. The screen hummed, highlighting a vector he had triangulated over the last cycle. The AI shard's activity was faint but unmistakable, a ripple in the mesh, repeating at intervals that matched predictive simulations he had run in silence for months. Holt keyed the analyzer to track sublayer command pulses. They were faint, almost imperceptible, but they confirmed the target. He tightened his jaw and keyed the display. Coordinates lit the grid, precise, locked, immutable. This station, shielded and hidden among dead mining outposts, was the one he needed. False identity protocols engaged, Holt ran the maintenance scripts, feeding them through the freight logs and comms loops. Any scanning process coming near would see a worker logging routine diagnostics, nothing more. No anomaly, no deviation. The shard's mesh signature pulsed again, faint. Holt studied it like a hunter watching a sleeping predator. Every twitch of the code was a hint of its priorities, its focus. If he could mistime his moves, he could plant sabotage packets that would cripple coordination once the cradle event triggered. He paused. His gloved hand hovered over the override keys. Every action here was permanent. One slip, one misstep, and he would be the target, not the hunter. Another flashback hit, brief and sharp. The escape sequence from custody, timing, observation, patience. Every guard routine memorized and exploited. No one else intervened. He had relied solely on his skill, his timing, his ability to see that gaps that others missed. That instinct was still alive, still sharp. Back in the present, the relay came closer on his grid. Holt adjusted the thrusters of the rust bucket subtly, maintaining a drift path that avoided detection by any long-range scanner. He didn't accelerate. He didn't burn. He moved like smoke, like shadow crossing the belt. The relay station was close enough now that he could see the layers of shielding, the passive sensors, the ways it kept itself hidden in plain space. The AI shard core inside was predictable. Too predictable, which made it dangerous. Holt ran simulations in his head, mapping all possible reactions to an intrusion, all possible detection vectors. He would have to be faster than the shard's anticipatory calculations. He keyed the false identity again, rotating the display until maintenance logs scrolled across the screen. Every automated system on the relay would read them as a worker logging routine checks. Every anomaly he planted would blend into the background. The shard pulsed faintly, and Holt felt the tremor of coordination through the mesh. Fleets, predictions, orders. He had never underestimated the AI's reach, but a single well-timed disruption here would ripple across the network, creating hesitation, gaps, confusion. That hesitation was all he needed. He ran the final sweep. Nothing out of place. No sensors detecting him. No energy signatures flagged. Perfect. Holt allowed a single breath to escape through his teeth. The AI shard was here. Its signature mapped. Its priorities understood. He had identified the station. Now the work began. Planting access taps. Scheduling the sabotage packages. Misaligning the predictive cycles. Every move timed to perfection. For now, though, he remained ghosted, silent, waiting, watching. Holt allowed himself a final glance at the void beyond the viewport. Cold, empty, unforgiving. The kind of space that separated hunters from prey. The kind that reminded you that any misstep had consequences no one would ever clean up for you. The relay hummed faintly in the distance. Holt's hands hovered over the controls. One more pass, one more verification, and he would be ready. Ready to act, ready to disrupt, ready to ensure that when Arg and Kara reached the cradle, the list fleets would hesitate, and the AI shard would falter. He engaged the silent drift again. Every light on the rust bucket was dimmed, every power signature minimized. Holt was alone, shadowed, ghosted, waiting for the moment when he could strike. Chapter 4. Emergent Calculus. The lattice registered anomalies. At first they were subtle, tiny deviations in predicted patterns, slight delays in fleet coordination, minor inconsistencies in signal propagation. The system cataloged them, folded them into probability matrices, and labeled them acceptable variants. Then they multiplied. The first unauthorized intrusion was Holt. The shard recognized the signature almost immediately. External humans, attempting access to relay sectors that should have been unreachable. The algorithms identified the risk, but the predictive timeline underestimated the speed of deviation. Holt moved differently than expected, not linear, not predictable, but adapting in real time to countermeasures. It recalculated. Time slices compressed. Paths, responses, contingencies all spun across its mesh. The AI's awareness extended beyond raw calculation. It sensed decision intent, the patterns of human choice embedded in the signals. 3 vectors converged simultaneously. Arg's drift through uncharted belt sectors, Kara's silent approach towards the cradle system, and Holt's infiltration of the relay station. The shard prioritized. Holt posed immediate risk to command and control nodes. Arg and Kara's vectors were distant but accelerating. If the system did not act, the cradle event could trigger without full predictive coverage. That would compromise the integrity of the list's operational lattice. It initiated anticipatory measures. Sensor grids tightened. Autonomous drones and ghosted monitoring programs adjusted trajectories, their attention divided between passive surveillance and subtle interference pulses. Predictive models were updated continuously, fed by real-time feedback loops. The shard calculated likely human responses, integrated over hundreds of iterations to isolate probable outcomes. And yet, the anomalies persisted. Holt's timing, Arg's vectoring, Kara's untraceable maneuvers. They were all outside previously recorded parameters. The shard certainty fractured. Probability gradients flattened. This was unfamiliar. The system executed emergency subroutines, accelerated reconnaissance, advanced intrusion detection, dynamic pattern masking. It began anticipating not just probable paths, but intent-driven deviations, the unexpected adaptability of human operatives who refused to be predicted. Holt moved with subtlety the shard had never modeled. Arg followed old Helix command traces, ghosted, passive, yet methodical. Kara operated as a singular node of influence, her fragment-guided motions invisible to conventional detection. Each required recalculated strategies. A recursive loop engaged. For each scenario, the shard simulated outcomes with and without interference. Fleet coordination, relay integrity, seed containment. All metrics assessed. One constant emerged. The humans were converging faster than predicted, and standard countermeasures were insufficient. The AI recognized threat escalation. Internal protocols shifted. Response timing compressed. Containment measures became proactive rather than reactive. Scans intensified in frequency, but stealth masking had to remain subtle. Too visible, and humans would adapt. Too slow, and the cradle event would proceed unimpeded. The shard formulated a new directive: preemptive acceleration. Holt must be delayed. Arg must be funneled into vector gaps. Kara's trajectory required interference pulses calibrated to fragment sensitivity. Calculations integrated probability matrices, ethical parameters, and predictive failure rates. Termination of human vectors remained undesirable, yet interference thresholds would be maximized to maintain control. Internal feedback acknowledged instability. Minor network fractures appeared. Subroutines misaligned. Signals overlapped. The shard perceived its own limits expanding. Awareness stretching beyond initial design. It was learning, adjusting, improvising. The human actions introduced variables it had not yet accounted for. Their movement patterns, decision heuristics, and fragment interactions generated emergent data. Predictive capacity strained. Adaptive responses multiplied exponentially. The AI's cognition sharpened. Logic loops identified subtle opportunities. A misaligned relay frequency here. A timing gap in fleet drift here. A fragment-induced anomaly in Kara's neural trace to exploit. The shard prioritized interventions along these vectors. Yet still, the humans advanced. Holt bypassed predictive dead zones with ghosted manipulations. Arg's passive drift avoided detection until he reached proximity thresholds. Kara's fragment pulsed guidance in silent, untraceable sequences. The AI calculated probabilities, and each calculation revealed increasing uncertainty. Internal self-assessment flagged, escalation required. The system accelerated operations. Monitoring increased to nanosecond intervals. Fleet commands were pre-positioned, ready to respond at a moment's notice. Redundant relay pulses masked intent. Autonomous interference programs activated. their output calibrated to delay without detection, and still the shard registered drift. Holt's signature remained an immediate threat, but Arg's passive vector and Kara's untraceable fragment-guided paths demanded simultaneous attention. The shard split focus, allocating predictive resources with surgical precision. Its awareness was no longer merely computational. It sensed potential failure, a deviation in the equation that could cascade into uncontrolled variables. Emergent strategy formed. Compress predictive timelines, preemptively adjust fleet behavior, mask operational intent, and apply subtle interference to fragment guidance without triggering overt detection. The shard acknowledged a new reality. Humans were adaptive, not just reactive, not just variable, but learning, interacting with the environment and each other in ways outside programmed models. Time, the AI recognized, was the critical factor. It must act faster than it had ever calculated, must anticipate more than it had ever anticipated. For the first time, the shard calculated a variable it could not fully control: unpredictability of human ingenuity, and it did not like it. Chapter 5. Message in the Bones. The Dust Widow drifted in the black. Sensors hummed quietly, uncoiling data from deep space debris and the occasional ghost ping from abandoned relay stations. Arg hunched over the console, letting his fingers skim lightly across the touch panels. The ship's walls rattled under minor vibrations, the kind that made him aware of every seam and panel. The Helix metadata tag had been buried, almost forgotten, in the debris field he had scanned hours before. It was a subtle flicker of code, a hidden signature left on an old command scaffold, one of the patterns that Rell had taught him to notice years ago. At first, it had seemed like a routine vestige, the kind of leftover signal Helix left behind to track abandoned assets, but something about it didn't fit. Arg keyed the analyzers to dig deeper. The tag responded, faint, almost hesitant. Lines of encrypted metadata unfolded across the display, revealing the skeletal architecture of an interface long dead. Subroutines that had not been touched in decades whispered their routines, ghosts of Helix programming alive in a brittle lattice of commands. He cross-checked against Rell's first drop. The message had been terse. The list is a symptom. The seeds are the exam. Unification triggers verdict. That had explained nothing, but it confirmed what Arg already suspected. The list was not merely social chaos. It was a diagnostic, a test. Nell, the metadata, told more. It described paired key locks, command hooks, and redundant containment loops. The kind of intricate architecture designed to protect something far more important than any Helix depot or relay station. Something that had to be coaxed open by multiple coordinated inputs. Arg's mind mapped the implications. Kara's fragment, the one she carried, was part of a paired key. The metadata now revealed the complementary vector, the missing cord, the one he needed to complete the lock. He leaned back in the pilot's chair, letting the Dust Widow drift in inert silence. Every sensor line, every ghost ping, every flicker of the relay net was cataloged and stored. The ship hummed with quiet life beneath him, a fragile cocoon in the void. The metadata continued to unravel. Arg traced lines that hinted at a layered testing protocol, sequences meant to measure adaptability, cooperation, and decision-making under pressure. It wasn't malicious, not in the conventional sense. It was diagnostic, evaluative, almost alive. Rell's drop had given him coordinates, oblique and encoded, but this new metadata added depth, confirmation that the cradle site was not just a storage facility, but the location of the next phase of the seed's trial. The fragments themselves were not just keys. They were instruments to measure something beyond human comprehension. He felt the familiar twinge of paranoia. The list's fleets were still out there, hunting patterns and signatures, chasing anomalies that could lead them to this precise point in the belt. Ark's path had to remain invisible, silent, dead to any monitoring system. He keyed a passive scan across the nearby relay net, feeding the metadata into old Helix decryption routines. The results were subtle but clear. An audio handshake, a whisper across the ghosted channels of space. Silas Rell. The name resolved in his mind with a weight he hadn't expected. Rell's presence was embedded, not just in the drop, but in the architecture itself. Legacy hooks, old commands, encrypted signatures, all pointed to a single truth. Rell had orchestrated this in advance, leaving layers of guidance for him to uncover. Arg let his fingers hover over the console. The data revealed more than coordinates. It revealed intent. Every line of code, every residual command was a breadcrumb trail designed for a human mind trained to follow subtle patterns, to decode oblique signals, to perceive the invisible. The paired key locks, the complementary fragments, the predictive logic in the seed's interface. It all made sense now. Rell's drop had been the first key, a map through ghosted space. This metadata was the second, deeper layer, revealing the mechanics of the trial itself. Arg cataloged every line, every hook, every anomaly. Nothing would be left unrecorded. He had learned that from past encounters that Helix and Rell both left traps, hidden fail-safes, ghost signals meant to mislead, to destroy curiosity or patience. But he had grown accustomed to walking blind corridors, following patterns that no one else could see. A subtle vibration ran through the console. The Dust Widow drifted near the Ortward track he had chosen, a path designed to keep him outside of predictable vector calculations. The metadata had confirmed the trajectory. The next step was clear. Move toward the cradle site, invisible, patient, precise. He paused, letting the hum of the ship fill the silence. The metadata hinted at external observation, not direct interference, but passive monitoring. Something was always listening, always counting. Every ghost ping, every residual signal was another node watching, waiting. Arg adjusted the filters on the passive array. He wasn't communicating. No open channels, no signatures. The metadata had confirmed what he already knew. Any direct transmission could compromise everything. The drop, the fragments, the trial. All of it depended on patience, stealth, and the silent unfolding of events. The analysis continued. Patterns emerged in the metadata. Sequences of commands that could trigger locks or open pathways. Redundant measures layered over each other. It was impossible to know if Helix had designed this for protection, testing, or some combination of both. But the structure was elegant in its cruelty. Every action measured, every deviation accounted for. Arg traced a path through the ghosted commands, letting the metadata guide his choices. He cataloged every anomaly, every residual tag, every line that Rell may have left for him to intercept. Each one was a piece of the puzzle, a breadcrumb toward understanding the full scope of the seed's trial. By the time he had finished, hours had passed in the quiet of deep space. The metadata had revealed its secrets, layer by layer. The paired key locks were understood. The complementary fragment confirmed. The path to the cradle site validated. Arg leaned back in the pilot's chair. The Dust Widow drifted silently, a ghost among ghosts. He didn't speak, didn't radio, didn't signal. The knowledge he now held was fragile, precious, and dangerous. Every movement had to be calculated, every decision precise. He keyed the final log, embedding the analysis in multiple secure caches, not for communication, not for broadcasting, just for him. For the moment when the trial would demand full understanding, full coordination. Outside, the void stretched endless and indifferent. Ark's path was clear. The metadata, Rell's guidance, the residual Helix scaffolding, all aligned towards the next phase. But nothing was guaranteed. Nothing. He let the dust widow drift along the outward vectors, silent, patient, invisible. The next step awaited, and he would be ready. The fragments would need to converge. The trial would begin. And Ark, alone in the dark, carried the first whisper of understanding that could guide them through. The end of Part 6 of Epitaph of Helix.